Greetings and welcome to this edition of the Pastor's Study. Remember that these sermons are being brought to you by the Church of God Seventh-day with headquarters in Salem, West Virginia. If you would like any additional information, please visit our website, or you can contact us at headquarters, and we will be glad to respond to your request. Again, I've shared with you in recent weeks that if you're alarmed by what's going on out there in the world, especially here in the United States, seeing all this riotous action take place, and you're upset by it, you don't know what's going on, I urge you to look into the Word of God. And if you need any particular help in that area, we'd be glad to assist you. As I normally do, I have a little story for you. And that is that a mother was relating an incident that happened, and she was saying that recently her 3-year-old boy, who was celebrating his birthday, received a present from his grandmother. And when he opened up the gift that he received, he found out that she had given him a water pistol. And he was just excited. He was beside himself, and he just couldn't wait. He just went immediately to the nearest sink to fill up the water pistol. And the young mother said to her mother, she said, "I am surprised at you." She said, "Don't you remember, how we used to drive you crazy when we got our water pistols and all the water guns that we used to use when we were children?" And the mother turns around to her with a smile on her face and she said, "Oh, I remember." Paybacks, right? Paybacks. Well, last week we had introduced you to the history behind, or the lead up to, the book of Daniel. And we were trying to explain to you how Daniel got into the king of Babylon's court. And if you're not a student of history itself, I do urge you to become a student of Bible history. And Bible history will give you a better grasp on the Word of God. And I think that that's very, very important, because it gives each and every one of us a background as to why people are in certain locations at certain periods of time, and what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what had happened to lead up to that particular event. And I think it's very, very helpful. And that's kind of what we tried to do, is just a little introduction as to what happened to the nation of Israel after it split. And of course, the people were carried away first. It was Israel, the northern part, that was carried away by the Assyrians, and then along comes King Nebuchadnezzar. And we introduce you to the fact that Daniel and those other boys were part of the family of the king of Judah. And they were helped, of course, by God in various things. I think if I go back to at least Daniel 1 and verse 17, we won't review everything, but just to remind you that in verse 17 it says, "As for these 4 children," now these 4 children would have been Daniel, and of course we knew them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Now these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And this becomes very, very important, because the way we left you last time was the fact that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He couldn't remember what the dream was, and he calls his, what did he say? I think it was like the sorcerers and the astrologers and the magicians and the Chaldeans, and he gets everybody in his court, and he brings them in front of me. He says, "Okay, I had this dream. It disturbed me. It bothered me." He said, "Interpret it for me." And, one of the men had, I guess I'm going to use the word boldness to say to the king, he said, listen, there isn't anybody out there that can tell. If you can't tell us what you dreamed, how can we interpret it? And, Nebuchadnezzar was not really happy with that answer, so much so that he wanted to kill him. He wanted to get rid of him. And this included these boys, Daniel and his three friends. And as soon as Daniel heard about that, he said to the one gentleman that, he said, just give me a little time here, and we'll get this all figured out. And so I think it was in Daniel. This would be 2:14. Says, then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? And of course, he went to his house. This would be in 17. Then Daniel went to his house. He told, the other boys what was going on, and he said, we asked that God would have mercy. In verse 18, he says that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And then, of course, in 19, it says, then the secret was revealed to Daniel. And he goes on to give God the credit and thank God. And I think I've relayed to you, and I've relayed to many people that I've spoken in front of, that, it is necessary for you and I to give God the recognition. It's most important that we not take credit for something that other than the fact that we are, bringing a message in a sense, but the message is, or the interpretation is from, or we gain wisdom by, through the power of God's Holy Spirit, and it's from God, and he's the one that, gives us and supplies everything. And we need to make sure we recognize that, and Daniel did. And we left off last time where he says, he goes to Arioch and he goes, pretty much, give me some time and I'll get this all squared away for you. And he says, bring me before the king. Verse 25, this would be Daniel 2:25. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Remember that they had given them their, like Babylonian names in a sense. And so Daniel was known as Belteshazzar to Nebuchadnezzar, not Daniel. So it says, whose name was Belteshazzar. This is in the middle of 26. Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he revealeth secrets, maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have. See, that's so important, right? More than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Okay? So then he goes on and he tells him about the dream. So Daniel is able to tell him what he dreamed. These other gentlemen couldn't do that. So this puts Daniel in a very, very good position or place with the king. So he goes on to say in verse 31, thou, O king, sawest and beheld a great image, the great image whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet a part of iron and part clay. His feet part of iron and part clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff in the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. So in about 31 to 35, 4 or 5 verses there, he's giving an encapsulated version of history, what's going to happen from that point on historically. And he was explaining to Nebuchadnezzar, and of course Nebuchadnezzar realizes this is the vision that he saw. But now, what does it mean? He wants to know from Daniel, what does it mean, right? 36, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. So if any of you have some references, and I do, you will see that we're reading in Daniel 2, but they also refer to and cross-reference Daniel 7. So we'll read part of this, and then we'll go to Daniel 7, and we'll bring in more information about the world government that he's telling Nebuchadnezzar about. In 37, he goes on to say, he says, Thou, O king, art the king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And that, that really hasn't changed. I mean, if you go back into the book of Romans, you will find that God is the one that puts people in power. He is the one that makes sure he ensures who he wants set up. He ensures who he wants knocked down, as it were. And that goes on till this day, because there are men that God has used throughout history. We were talking about this earlier today in our Sabbath school lesson, that there are men that God uses throughout history, like Pharaoh. And he said that, Pharaoh existed to show God's glory in a sense. It wasn't to enhance Pharaoh's position, because God was using him to show the world that, you see, the pharaohs thought themselves as God. The people almost referred to them as God. And so God was showing them that that was not so, that he was the real God. He was the one that brought things about, not these men, these pharaohs. And of course, we talked about, I think it was even Nebuchadnezzar, I think, goes on to say, after something happens to him, Daniel's God is God. And one of the other gentlemen that will come later, one of the Cyrus the Persian, I believe, God uses him. He refers to him as his anointed, even though he is like a Gentile king, Gentile leader, and yet he uses him to allow the Israelites to go back and rebuild the temple. And not only that, he gives them all the things that Nebuchadnezzar took, so that they can take them back and put them in the temple for, temple use. So he starts off with, he's the king. And of course, in 38, it says, And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And, I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar probably go, wow, I'm the head of gold. He's the high muckety muck, as they call it, right? He's the top of the heap. So in 39 it says, "And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth." So what's going to happen is historically is that one kingdom is going to defeat and replace another, and then that's going to be defeated and replaced by another, and so on down the line. And we're going to have these dominant cultures. And we see this, that even though they are, say, mighty and strong and defeat the previous kingdom, they are not as maybe not as valuable. Maybe that's not the right word. They're inferior. They're maybe not as like strong as the first one was. It's like we call it like a Xerox copy, right? You have the original, and then you put the original in a machine, and it makes a copy. We call it a Xerox copy. Again. All copy machines aren't Xeroxes, but it just became the word that we use. And of course, you put this in, it makes a copy, but it's not like the original. It's inferior. It's not the same. And it would be the same way if you took that copy and put it in and made another copy. It's certainly not like the original, and it's not like the second copy. It's now it's not like the copy, it's the second copy, and it's different. And the word is inferior. And he uses that word in 39. "And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth." So even though they're inferior to the head of gold and the breast and arms of silver, there's still this third kingdom of brass is still ruling over all the earth. They're the most powerful entity on the earth at that particular time. And then he goes on in 40, "And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, parts of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay." So what's happening is he sees this image of a man. And as we come down this image, we have this head of gold, and then the shoulders of an inferior metal, which would be silver, and then a more inferior metal, which would be brass, and then a more inferior metal, which would be iron. And as a result, it's not as pure, I guess. I don't know strength-wise, but it doesn't have the same quality, I guess. And I guess I just have to keep going back to that word inferior. But you keep in mind what's happening as well is that as we go down this image is becoming more and more part of the earth, more and more part of the people. And when you consider various cultures, you'll notice that sometimes there are things that cultures pick up from other cultures. And we can probably look today and look around us, and we can see that there are things that we do today that were influenced by other cultures many years ago. And so even though Babylon under like at King Nebuchadnezzar's time doesn't exist, we know that there's certain influences. I mean, we have, I guess it's like Arabic numbers, and there's like some of our math that come from, other cultures. And of course we have languages, and we have interpretations like of those languages. We look at the calendar, and we look at various religious practices. And some of these things have been around for centuries. So these different cultures, even though they don't exist, they still have played an important part of influence um, in the world. And like I said, we see that today. 42. And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So you see what I'm saying is it comes down and it's really mixing with mankind. And those particular cultures were very, very dominant. They had influence over the people in many, many areas. But we'll see that when we come down to this, the Iron Kingdom, which is really Rome, you'll see that the Iron Kingdom of Rome uh, took on a different persona in that it became a religious entity as well. And it had great influence, was influential at the time of Christ, continued to be influential for many, many years after Christ. And then, of course, what happens is it virtually disintegrates within the framework of mankind. And we'll notice that I think when we went back here, and he says to them, if we go back to Daniel 2:34, thou sawest still that a stone was cut out without hands. Now, the stone that was cut out without hands is Jesus Christ. So he comes along. Now, it wasn't an immediate impact, but once Jesus establishes his church and once he sends out his disciples, it permeates the earth, and this kingdom, the Iron Kingdom of Rome, is not going to exist any longer, but yet its influence is certainly out there. But we have to understand that this stone that was made without hands, Jesus Christ, is going to set up a kingdom. 34, thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and gold broken to pieces together. You see what I'm saying? The previous kingdoms, it still comes down and permeates mankind. It's not done away with. It becomes like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and wind carried them away. It still has an influence. It's like dust. Carries it away from a certain area, but it still has a presence someplace else. It's still dirty. It's still dusty. Um, and it says, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this is what's going to happen in the future. And of course, when Jesus comes back, he's going to set up his kingdom. And we were talking today about how Jerusalem is referred to like the Holy Mountain. What we are awaiting is the New Jerusalem. And so he's going to set up his kingdom, his everlasting kingdom. And it is going to permeate the whole earth. So even though it didn't have the influence during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, it is going to have an impact later on. So man had the opportunity, and of course it lost that opportunity, only to come along, have Christ enter the scene, send out his disciples, looking forward to the future when he was going to set up his government, the everlasting government. Um, it's like he said, Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. Well, Jesus Christ is going to be, platinum, titanium, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm just using, physical terms, but it's certainly going to be better than anything we had before. Nonetheless, this information is history. Like I said last week, it was prophecy at the time of Daniel. He was living in a historical moment, but he was talking about things which were going to come. We're sitting here today saying that those things have come and gone. Now, what we are looking forward to is this kingdom, the one that smote the great, that smote the other images in a sense, right? And we are waiting for this great mountain that fills the whole earth. That's the important aspect of this. Now, let me go back. I'm going to go back and talk about Daniel 2 in 37. It says, Thou, O King, art the King of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. Now, the reference there is to Daniel 7:4. So if you turn with me to Daniel 7:4, in fact, we'll back up to Daniel 7:1. It says, In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, now this is, I believe it's a grandson. I believe that's who it is. Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And of course, that would be the people. The great sea would be people. Verse 3, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. So these kingdoms came from the people, and they were different. Verse 4, the first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So the lion and the eagle's wings represent Babylon. In verse 5, it says, And behold, another beast, a second like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had three ribs in the mouth, and of it between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Well, here we have the Medes and the Persians who come along and defeat the Babylonians. It's just described in a different way. And then in verse 6 it says, After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings of a fowl. The beast also had four heads, and dominion was given to it. And of course, this is the Greek Empire, and it was very, very swift. Leopard, speed. Alexander the Great was a great general and basically destroyed, everything in a sense in a very, very fast manner. I was reading a history book one time. They said that his saddle blanket, I guess in a sense, was really made of a leopard skin. And so this kind of fits him really to a T. And so he comes along and he conquers everything there is to conquer. So the Babylonians were conquered by the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians are conquered by the Greeks. And then again, along come the Romans. And in 7 it says, After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns, and it was diverse because within the framework of Rome, they introduced this false religion that they want people to follow. So it was the fact that they were a Roman empire, a physical empire, but they also wanted to be a religious empire. They wanted people to be totally part of the Roman experience. That's what they wanted people to buy into. And so they were trying to keep everybody in line either through power or religion. And sometimes it's the power of religion that keeps the people in line. So we have this situation where now Rome becomes, remember, Rome is the dominant culture when Jesus Christ comes to the earth. Back to Daniel 2. We're going to go to Daniel 2 and verse 44. And this is just going to repeat what we were talking about before about the stone that was, cut without hands. Verse 44, it says, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure." Right? So Nebuchadnezzar knows exactly well what Daniel has told him is exactly what the vision that he saw. Daniel interprets it for him. Nebuchadnezzar sees that. And the last part of chapter 2 here in 46, it says, "Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth, it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal his secrets." See, he's a Gentile king, and here we have him saying, Daniel's God is God, right? Doesn't mean he's going to follow him necessarily, but he recognizes at that moment in time that Daniel's God is God. 48, "Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king." I think I used the word court, but in the gate of the king. So we're going to end with that today. We'll get into chapter 3 and beyond. And, certainly if you have any questions or anything, you can contact me. You can contact me through, headquarters. You can send me an email, bud25847 at AOL.com. I'll be glad to answer any question for you. Until next time, this is Pastor Bud Randall saying goodbye, friends.